Sonic Boom Episode 2. Translate this. We see the heroes relaxing on the beach, with Sonic appreciating being lazy apparently, and Amy throws back the ball Styx was playing with. Styx saying that it's nice to be totally free makes it obvious what the humor will be afterwards. Tails then reveals that he's finally made a universal translator, which somehow translates birds, as well as translating what the true meaning of what people say is. It says Tails didn't actually intend for it to read minds, even though the only way it could ever translate any language is if it worked that way, by interpreting the images in a person's mind, which bypasses any language. It annoys Sonic's friends being rude, and gets shut off before it tells them that Amy has a crush on Sonic. Because in this show, Amy's realistic and doesn't tell Sonic that she's interested in him when he clearly wouldn't feel the same. And Eggman was spying on the machine and plans against the heroes. Tails feels bad about the fact that, for once, his new invention had a bad impression on his friends, and the machine says what he was feeling. Somehow, Tails doesn't hear Orbot and Cubot sneaking into his room, even though it's literally seconds after he tried to go to sleep. It turns out Orbot's altered the robot to make the machine say what Eggman's saying, which causes the machine to say that Amy stinks, Knuckles is an idiot, and Knuckles thinks that Styx is ugly. I love seeing Styx tackle and attack Knuckles for that. It's entertaining to see her be like that. The machine decides to praise Eggman, and Styx reveals that the machine wants them all to turn against each other. After Amy annoyingly disbelieves her when this world has Eggman in it, and the machine just praised Eggman, Tails' naivety comes in handy, as he just assumes his friends weren't really thinking those insulting thoughts about each other. Even though it's not impossible that they do think that about each other. So he looks in the machine and realizes what's going on, and he wants to save the real UT. Sonic and his friends naturally don't want to save a machine that made them fight all the time. Even though the original one didn't do that, it just made them awkward from revealing the truth. Wait, shouldn't Tails give the machine to the police so it can pull confessions from criminals? That idiot doesn't realize the true potential of his invention. Tails easily gets to Eggman, lands in his cake with the machine lampshading that, and even though Tails is surrounded by some badniks, they somehow don't all attack him at once. Tails offers his assistance to Eggman as his lab assistant. Well, that was easy. Wait, Tails has to be lying to get an excuse to get his machine back. Shouldn't Eggman realize that? Eggman's excited about Tails working for him though, to the point where he already favoritizes him over Orbot. And Tails just casually tells his friends that he's going to stay with Eggman, and they don't need to rescue him because he's safe and happy. So this is a gambit of his where he assumes they'll come rescue him anyways because he has to be lying. At first, Sonic's friends planned on recycling the machine, and it'd be great if they did, so we'd have an excuse to have Tails work for Eggman for a lot longer and give the plot point the proper tension. And plus, it'd be recycling. But instead, the Universal Translator reveals the truth in Tails' hologram message. Tails is told to do something that's unsafe, since he's looking at some sparking electricity and is told to plug something in. So how does this not lead to him being electrocuted to death? Already, the heroes show up at Eggman's door, and Eggman's already right there with Tails. This is such an underwhelming waste of a plot point. You'd expect Tails working for Eggman as his lab assistant to be the focus of an entire episode, like it was in AOSTH just fine. Sonic saves Amy from a robot, and the translator reveals that he cares about her well-being. The action scene's pretty boring. Knuckles and Styx are totally ineffective at even denting the giant robot that Eggman fortunately thought to send against them. Eggman has to deploy the photon bombs instead of Tails, since of course Tails wasn't exactly brainwashed to work for him. On Sonic's order, Styx throws one of the bombs at Knuckles so he can hit it at the robot and send it into the ocean, which causes Eggman to unhappily go back into his base. And Tails thanks his friends for the rescue, even though I'm sure with an Eggman this unintimidating, he could escape on his own. Like by doing something as simple as climbing out his bedroom window and flying away. Nah, I'm sure it's locked. And the story ends with Styx throwing the truth-revealing machine to the ocean, when it could have been worth millions of dollars to Tails for how useful it would be to the world. Tails just glares at her instead of attacking her for that obvious betrayal because he's just that meek and scared of the consequences. Even though, if there's anything I could define right away as a betrayal of Tails, I think throwing his invention in the ocean would be at the top of that list. He worked hard on that device for who knows how long. Why can't Tails just make another machine like that? Not show it to his friends, and mass produce and sell it for millions of dollars. Logically, if the show had continuity, he would do that, and the next episode would have Tails be rich. And then he could squander all the money away, so it's not like it has to change the status quo. But to be fair, Tails is so humble, at least when he's being portrayed accurately, that I can't imagine him retiring to a mansion just because he's got a lot of money. And him having a lot of money would perfectly explain why all of his friends don't have to get actual jobs to support themselves. So maybe Tails actually is rich off his inventions. Maybe he's got millions in the bank, and uses it to support him and his friends' middle-class lifestyle. And they can't exactly move to a rich neighborhood or something, because who would fight Eggman at that point? They have to stay close to him. Problem is, I can't imagine his irresponsible friends not taking advantage of how rich he is, peer pressuring him into wasting the money on luxuries. So maybe Tails is smart enough to see this kind of peer pressure coming and hide how much money he has from them, because otherwise he'd end up being the focus of an entire episode and he'd lose all that money. I'd just rather believe that such a useful invention of Tails has got built again and reached its full potential to help the world, instead of being completely wasted by Styx throwing it into the ocean on him. Realistically, nobody on Mobius after this would ever have to struggle with translating a language again if they had one of his machines. But to be fair, I think one of those machines would be prohibitively expensive, since it just got invented, and only he can make them. Tails would have to be nice and keep the price down so that every police station could afford one of his machines. Not to mention everyone who plans on being a tourist in another country. There's also the risk of people becoming complacent because of his translator and not bothering to properly learn foreign languages anymore. Why spend years on difficult language lessons when you can just talk to someone with the machine instead? Well, of course, the machine would reveal embarrassing truths you didn't mean to say. That's the nature of how the machine translates. Nobody would want that for a translator. That could cause an international incident. Like, imagine if it translated some country leader's peace treaty as, "I want to invade your country," after making you think there's going to be a truce. People would want to know if someone's telling them the truth, but they'd have to be able to make the machine unable to reveal embarrassing truths from them in particular, and only make the machine scan the brains of other people. Well, I think that could be programmed, but then the machine wouldn't be able to translate what that person's saying at all. Really, while the machine does have a problem, the sheer amount of usefulness it would have for police interrogations would revolutionize the world. All anyone would have to do to find out what crime someone committed is force them to talk to that machine. The problem is, even the most minor crimes would all get found out and prosecuted. You couldn't get away with anything anymore. Even something like pirating a video game from the 90s, you couldn't hide that anymore, and you get in trouble. Punishing major crimes, that's something everyone can agree with. Everyone wants a world where every murderer and so on gets caught. And that could happen if there's a law that every month or something, everyone has to talk to Tails' machine and tell them whether they broke the law. But if that machine ended up punishing basically every crime there is, no matter how worthwhile it is to punish it, and no matter how over the top the punishment would be, there would be an angry mob going after Tails immediately. Because at that point, basically everyone would be in legal trouble. The only way to prevent this would be if the police would only be able to make you talk to the machine if they have a warrant. Like, they have to have reason to suspect you of a crime first. But even then, do you really expect that to be the case in every country? What about dictatorships where there are no rights? And if this version of Mobius has the internet, and yes, we'll always be calling it Mobius, then everyone's gonna know that Tails is responsible for this truth machine, and he'll be forced to find another house and hide because everyone would be after him. Imagine if almost everyone was part of the same internet mob. Tails would basically have to invent a cloaking device for himself in his new house because everyone would hate him. The only way he could avoid this is if he kept his identity anonymous before he submitted the machine to the police. But even then, the show understands that Tails is supposed to be naive, so Tails would be too excited to even think to stay anonymous. He'd want everybody to know he made it, and then it backfired him horribly. So it wouldn't be such a bad thing that Styx threw his invention in the ocean if someone warned Tails about the negative consequences of his invention at its full potential. That would scare him away from ever making a truth machine again. Way more effectively than his jerk friends not liking it. By the way, if they had this machine in the previous episode, Eggman wouldn't have been able to carry out his plan. Problem is, since nobody ever believes Styx about anything, even though she's been mostly right about her paranoia in the show so far, I think Sonic would be the only one who would think of these consequences. I can't take Amy and Knuckles seriously in the show when they're clearly intended as nothing but bland, failed comedy relief. So far, Knuckles isn't nearly as stupid as I expected him to be yet, and Amy's much more. In fact, she didn't have a personality in this episode. Her only gimmick was her secret crush on Sonic, which is finally a secret to make her relatable. I guess the only one who'd think of the consequences and warn Tails would be Sonic. I mean, he's so grumpy in the show that he's basically Shadow, and who better to think of the bad consequences than someone negative? So Sonic should have warned Tails that if he brought his invention to where it'd be the most useful and mass-produced it, everyone would be suffering from its uncomfortable truth-revealing power. And nobody would really want that because they wouldn't be immune to it. And you have to have the machine physically with you to translate stuff anyways, so for non-rich people, that's way less convenient than Google Translate or actually knowing the language yourself. I don't think you'd be asking for much for one of Tails' friends to warn him about all that, because they made it clear the whole episode why they thought the machine sucked. If they just convinced Tails that it wasn't worth it and made as good a case as I did, I think that would have been a much more satisfying justification for the machine not showing up anymore. Then Sticks throwing it into the ocean where Tails can just make another one, or build a submarine to retrieve it. Here's something I can compliment about the episode. The machine shows up at the beginning of it, and we see Tails tell his friends that he's been working on it for quite some time, off screen. That's much better writing than a machine coming out of nowhere in the middle of a story as a Deus Ex Machina after we saw the character start making it. It'd be stupid if he made a machine way too quickly to be believable, but instead it's left ambiguous how long he's been working on it. So we can pretend he took months to build it or something. So at least it's natural that Tails has this machine instead of him building it way too quickly. But of course, since it reveals the truth, his friends didn't like it, and Eggman was smart enough to try to sabotage the team with a fake version of the machine, which is another potential horrible consequence of Tails mass-producing that invention. If Eggman could make one fake machine to get fake truth out of people, then he can make a whole bunch of them, and ruin the credibility of Tails' machine when word gets out, because how are people supposed to know which machine is real? Basically, Tails' machine fascinated me by getting me to think about how it actually affected the world if it wasn't just stuck with him. Even if that was probably unintentional of the episode, since it only focused on how the machine affected one group of people. Speaking of wasted potential, how about Tails becoming Eggman's lab assistant? The only thing that came out of that intriguing idea was one little unfunny gag where somehow Eggman thinks it's a good idea to put Tails' life at risk, when he's lucky he's helping him at all. Granted, Tails is his enemy, not very trustworthy, and he doesn't care about anyone but himself. And from what's been implied, he has Orba and Cubot be his lab assistants most of the time, and it works out fine. So while getting Tails hurt or killed would waste him as a lab assistant, when he was super excited about it by the way, it's not like he couldn't just replace him with an equally competent robot, or use his DNA to make an infiltrator of him, and he doesn't need him anyways. The point is, it's stupid of Eggman, and if you were going to go with that, that should have been the focus of an entire episode. It'd be a good way to establish that Eggman's a villain by having him constantly get Tails burned or electrocuted trying to work for him. He'd be getting revenge on his enemy, which makes just as much sense for Eggman to do with a captured enemy as using him for slave labor that Orba could do anyways. But for it to make sense that Tails would survive all that slapstick, and not have to stay in the hospital after the first time, he'd have to get a lot of rings first. I'm sure Eggman could find them, like with a ring-detecting vacuum. Knowing this show, they'd never think to do that and the story would suck. Eggman should have known that Tails was only with him to get back his machine, and why did he trust the enemy to do a good job working for him instead of trying to secretly sabotage him at every corner? If he's that quick to trust Tails because he's working for him, Tails would be able to do a lot of sabotaging of him. But I think even Boom Eggman would figure Tails out after his giant robots kept failing to work right and falling apart. While this was a good episode, it had a lot of wasted potential in its two main ideas. We could have seen how the truth machine would actually change the world if it was everywhere it needed to be. And then when everyone would turn against Tails for making it, they could undo the whole thing with time travel, or say it was all a dream. Even that would be better than never showing us the consequences of his device, which we really should see because unless Tails was talked out of it properly, which he wasn't, logically those consequences would happen eventually because Tails would build another version of that machine anyways, because he'd know how much money he would make off it. He'd sell it to the local police at least. Though that's assuming the police wouldn't just send people to steal it from him for free. But if that always happened, well, one, he built a security system for his lab that would keep people out, and two, why would he bother making revolutionary inventions if they always got stolen so he couldn't make money off them? Well, he's a good person. Maybe he wouldn't be too bothered because he makes them out of the kindness of his heart, and because he's excited about inventing, not just to get rich. But he has to be rich to afford paying the rent for all of his friends living together. Sonic X made much more sense because that's exactly how they justified it there. They all lived in some rich people's mansion, so of course those people could afford to keep them there. So for it to make sense, he has to actually get paid for his inventions. And since he could build a security system for his lab easily, they'd only be able to steal it from him by attacking him and taking it after agreeing to pay him. And I think that'd be illegal of them anyways, and he could charge them. You know, this episode got me interested when I had that much to say about it. The bottom line is, that ending where Six threw the machine to the ocean didn't do nearly enough to justify there being no consequences to the fact that Tails can invent such a revolutionary machine now. He wouldn't just forget how to make it. Even if he got hit in the head, any hit in the head that gave you memory loss would give you a lot more problems than just that, so that wouldn't be satisfying either. It would just be a lazy way to resolve the dangling plot thread. So I'd like to feel better by thinking that this plot thread did get resolved, if off screen, because Sonic just talks Tails out of building another one. Episode 2-2, Buster. I immediately thought of Arrested Development with that title. I hope that's an intentional reference. We start out with some fire out of nowhere, melting a random civilian's ice cream cone by his fireman robot. So at least for once we see a permanent consequence of Eggman's evil behavior. AOSDH had those all the time. Another one of his robots tries to bring a kid into a burning house. What did Eggman plan on gaining from this? I guess it's to intimidate people into accepting him as their ruler. That's also why one of his robots puts some animal in a tree, and another one threatens people with an actual fire hose. This is pretty clever, but it was awful that Sonic made a pun, which Archie Sonic abandoned for a reason. This kind of Sonic is someone they're trying to portray as cool. That's why he's grumpy and tired and apathetic all the time. Yeah, by that logic, I'm cool. I find him relatable because of that. Styx shakes an animal out of a tree, and her friends lecture her about it back home, and she ends up finding a robot dog in the garbage, and somehow finding it cute. She calls it Buster and snuggles it, and while it is sweet of her, it's also wildly out of character for someone as paranoid as her to not immediately suspect an obvious robot dog being made by Eggman. It came out of nowhere. It gets some slime on Tails, and she thinks that's because he loves him, and the slime makes Sonic slip while running. This has gotta be programmed by Eggman as a trap to them. It also bothers Knuckles when he's trying to lift a barbell. Well, at least seeing this gives a good logical explanation for why Boom Knuckles looks the awful way he does. He literally does lift weights. Maybe he's self-conscious and that's why he tries so hard to be strong, to justify his position in the team. But this show likes to portray him as an egomaniac. Then someone tells the heroes that someone's robbing the warehouse, and it's so obvious that just Cubot and Orbot with badly drawn Sonic and Tails masks. He shouldn't have said someone, he should have said it was them, or at least said it was robots. The heroes have to face some buzz bombers. Thank God the show at least has badniks in it. But it's awfully polite of the badniks to wait so long in between firing at them. I'm pretty sure they had plenty of time to fire at the heroes, and all the time they're standing there and talking instead of constantly running around, excitingly dodging their attacks. I guess this is why the action scenes suck. Knuckles tells Styx that Buster ruined their chance to stop those robots earlier. I guess I was looking away too long typing because I didn't see Buster do that at all. Buster manages to be even more annoying to the main characters than the Buster in Arrested Development. The heroes try to walk out of Tails' house, with Tails being so vulnerable to peer pressure that he almost walks out of his own house. That's interesting of him. And somehow it comes as a surprise to Sonic that Eggman built Buster when he casually shows up at their house, which you'd think would have a security system that at the very least would warn them when Eggman shows up and carry him away with a giant crane. But they just find him that intimidating. Suddenly, Eggman uses Buster to make a giant robot to threaten them. A robot which Styx is reluctant to fight because it's made out of her pet. And Knuckles and Amy and even Tails get easily grabbed by the robot's tentacles. Like art in Underground. Sonic runs into something and makes it flip over with his foot to send it at the robot and damage it in a creative way. But somehow even that wasn't enough and it gets grabbed by it too. Pathetic. Sonic reveals that Buster won't attack Styx, which she naturally finds sweet. And she reminds him of the good times she had. It's so weird to see a paranoid conspiracy theorist be idealistic, even in the face of a giant evil robot. And Styx says that she doesn't remember any of the good memories in the montage, so it was made up. After it realistically fails to work, she scolds Buster into letting her friends go. At least that was creative and a use of the Chekhov's gun, which is better than the writer not taking advantage of the fact that he was her pet at all, and having all of his love be fake. So he throws Eggman away from them and returns to normal, and somehow Styx decides to say goodbye to Buster, for no reason whatsoever other than the show hates continuity. It would have made a lot more sense if the heroes had said that they're sending Buster away because he sprays slime everywhere. But even then, why the hell doesn't Tails just get rid of the slime in him in his lab? He could program that out of him. If Styx is so attached to a robot pet, it makes zero sense that she'd suddenly make him run away without any sort of provoking. She wouldn't care they turn out to be an evil robot because she could just guilt him into being good anyways. How did it ever get attached to Styx when it's made by Eggman? And who do they expect to take care of this lost robot pet? Who's gonna change his oil and maintain him other than Eggman, who would obviously just scrap him for spare parts? This isn't the humane thing of them to do, and that's weird for a bunch of so-called good guys. It makes it embarrassingly obvious that the show literally had a meta rule against continuity. At least that means things can't get too confusing if you watch the show's episodes out of order. I still had to get a list of the episode order though. Without it, I ended up skipping episodes by accident in season 1 and 2. So this was a nice creative episode with a terribly forced ending. Styx wouldn't say goodbye to her robot pet that easily, and all of the heroes should have assumed it was by Eggman from the start. Tails is a genius, isn't he? But it was interesting to see Eggman make an evil fireman robot that does the exact opposite of what a real fireman would do. Since this has nothing to do with terrorizing people as a tyrant and ruling people, and it's mostly focused on bothering civilians instead of trying to kill Sonic, this kind of plan only very slightly makes sense for Dr. Robotnik to do. He's trying to terrorize the civilians into agreeing to make him the ruler, I guess. He's sadistic. But he doesn't say that. Him having random, pointless evil plans against the civilians instead of his active enemies is really out of character. I've seen almost every other version of Eggman available, and none of them made a habit of doing this because they'd have nothing to gain from it. That's why most of the plans of AOSTH Eggman were about trying to kill Sonic or take over the world, because that show actually got Eggman as a character. That's just a nitpick though compared to how ridiculously stupid the heroes were for not instantly getting that Buster was a robot of Eggman's. And how stupid Tails was for not immediately getting rid of the slime spray feature of the robot the minute it bothered anybody. It was an idiot plot right away. If Eggman could get a robot of his adopted as a pet by the heroes, logically it'd be programmed to kill them in their sleeps. It'd have a bomb in it, for example, and that'd be the whole plan. Why does he think that's too anticlimactic? What's the difference between killing them when their guards are down with a bomb and killing them with a giant robot? Both times, if the killing would happen, it'd still feel too easy and quick and lucky. Buster even had them all in his grip. You'd think he would have immediately squeezed them to death. Eggman's terrible trying to kill them, even when he has a perfect opportunity. But at least there's a possible explanation with Boom Eggman, because he's kind of the least evil Eggman of them all. Maybe he doesn't actually want to kill them and is subconsciously sabotaging his own efforts, so he doesn't try as hard as he logically would. Eggman in Season 3 of Sonic X is the only reason I'd even entertain the idea of Eggman having a soft side like that. Because in Sonic X, he not only lectured one of the bad guys about hurting Chris, but he yelled at his robot sidekick for doing something that could kill Tails. And when he took over the flying vehicles of heroes like Amy and Sonic, he just had them stop instead of crash into walls and kill them. If these guys were fighting against a Robotnik who was actually trying, they'd all be dead by now. I mean, Eggman knows where they live! He regularly goes to visit their house like it's nothing! That's the exact opposite of Thaddeum and Archie, where him not knowing where the heroes lived was an essential part of the premise of the story, because we were expected to believe that if he knew exactly where they lived, he'd immediately try to destroy their house or have everyone in the town captured. Even in Fleetway, while Eggman knew where Sonic's village was, he was constantly sending badniks against it because of that. And the minute he found out where the village got relocated, he kidnapped them all to put them in a certain death trap. In Sonic Underground, the heroes have to constantly be on the move. They live in a van, and we barely see Sonic's house in OSCH. But in this show, Eggman knows where exactly the heroes live, and he doesn't just drop a bomb on it in the middle of the night. There's a reason this isn't the norm, because other continuities realize what a stupid plot hole that'd create, and they have standards. This show is establishing right off the bat that it doesn't care about being believable. It's especially frustrating when they could easily explain it, and they don't. Eggman eventually found out Renat was an Archie, and that even led to him destroying it. Which is way more competent than Boom Eggman, who has no reason not to do that. And then they had to explain it away as the heroes in Noob City has a force field to protect them. So if Tails' house had a foolproof force field generator to protect it from Eggman, that'd be fine. But he could just casually walk into their house whenever he wants, and even send a robot if he's in there. The only possible logical explanation for why it hasn't just destroyed their house when they're sleeping is that Eggman doesn't really want them dead. His life would be too boring without them. I'd say all the work that comes with running the world would make his life too busy to let him be bored, but if he finds paperwork boring, he's not meant to run a world anyways. Maybe the heroes regularly sneak into his base to look for bombs and missiles and get rid of them. So even if he was trying to destroy their house, they'd stop him. But we saw in an earlier episode that Eggman's base has a security system. Sonic and Tails disabled it no problem though, but it's ambiguous whether they needed Eggman to tell them how to do that. I'm sure he would have gotten a new security system afterwards, since now they know how to get past it whenever they want. So he'd make a security system too great for the hero to get past, and buy himself all the time he needs to make a missile. But the heroes could bypass any security system if Tails just made an intangibility device and flew into his base while using it. So ultimately, him having any security system is only good for keeping the characters who aren't the heroes out, like the police or the government. Did Tails make an invention to brainwash Eggman into being against killing the heroes in anticlimactic, overly easy ways? You'd think he would have made one that could brainwash him into being against threatening them entirely. So that just raised further questions to make Eggman even be evil, either forced or something that makes the heroes selfish opportunists because they want him to keep being evil so they can take advantage of the perks of being heroes. Basically, it kinda makes sense that Eggman doesn't just destroy their house or make the robot pet explode on them, if you stop and think about it. Because maybe he's too good for that, or maybe he's a challenge seeker who'd find that too boring and underwhelming. There's no way he wouldn't have thought of that. Plus, he wouldn't be able to actually see their demise in detail, because the robot with the cameras for him would blow up and take the cameras with it. And same goes if he even had a camera in the house before blowing the house up. He wouldn't see their demise, just the rubble afterwards. Or maybe he does make bombs and missiles, but the heroes sneak into his base on a regular basis and get rid of them off screen. And maybe they did that so much that Eggman gave up. But if they can prevent him from building that, it'd look kinda stupid of them to not prevent him from building his robots too. This whole plot could have been avoided if they had snuck into his base and destroyed his robots before they could be finished. None of the plots would happen because he wouldn't get to finish any robots. And I can only imagine Sonic being so desperate for a thrilling life that he leaves his robots alone so he can fight them later. None of his other friends should agree with that. So it can't be that they're sneaking into his base all the time destroying his missiles and bombs, because then why don't they destroy his robots before they're finished? Not to mention, why don't they get caught and captured? If Tails needed his friends to rescue him from the base when he became his lab assistant, it shouldn't be easy to get in and out of there whenever they want. He'd just leave like he always does after dismantling his bombs. And of course, Eggman's evil. And if he doesn't want to kill the heroes, why does he send giant robots to kill them? So the most likely explanation for the show not being over already is that Eggman would find the most easy, common sense victories to be too obvious, anticlimactic, and therefore not a proper display of his genius because only he could destroy them with his robots in a battle. But a lot more people than just him could send a bomb or missile to their house, or just shoot them with a gun. So he doesn't do the obvious things that anybody evil would do easily, be more competent than him, because he thinks he could do those anytime, and he wants a better victory than that. I hope he actually explains this in the show, because if he doesn't, that's a giant plot hole that just left gaping open the entire time. It's still not nearly as stupid as Knothole not being discovered, though. It makes way more sense that if Sonic had a house, Eggman would know where it was, just like everyone else would. His house should be in another dimension, but I think it made the most sense of all in AOSCH, where it was implied that Sonic was constantly on the move, since he's about running. The 2 times we saw him with a sedentary house, the homes looked nothing like each other, and one was a big tent and the other was a cave. So it's implied that he was spending every night crashing on someone's couch, which does make more sense for explaining how Eggman doesn't know where he is and kill him in his sleep. He could be sleeping anywhere for all he knows. So it's sad when even AOSCH makes more sense than this show. You know Eggman's a threat at the end of the day when Sonic can't have a house because he has to spend every night hiding from him. Still, no matter how much fun Boom Eggman has building robots and fighting Sonic, you'd think eventually he'd get so sick and tired and bored of it that he would do the smart thing at some point and end the fighting once and for all. And the heroes would never suspect it because they can't take him seriously anymore. All of his robots die in one hit. How does he find that fun? It's normal for people to get bored of stuff they think is fun when they do it every day for years. So realistically, Sonic Boom would have a pretty dark and abrupt ending, where an elderly Eggman gets fed up and sends a missile to Sonic's house one night. But we'll never get to see it because that'd be too dark, so it's thankfully kept off screen, taking place after the final episode. Or maybe Eggman will die before that could happen, from his own incompetence. Yeah, it's bound to happen eventually when he's fighting Sonic with giant robots all the time. One of them just randomly went rogue and tried to destroy his base. If that can even happen, then he's on a time limit.